Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. For today's letter, Serena has given us a letter that specifically relates to dating people who you think might have outgrown their ways as players, but it turns out sometimes age doesn't mature everyone. Serena writes, I'm writing this letter as it may help people who, like me, never knew about attachment styles, let alone avoidant attachers. Serena writes, I started dating my avoidant attacher 2 years ago. I was persuaded by my friends to be wary as I knew him to be a player when he was younger. Now I'm 54, he's 57, so I assumed that at this age he would have matured. I decided to give it a go. His close friend informed me his ex had turned into an alcoholic and he'd cared for her for the last couple of years but couldn't cope, and she was in lockdown for the duration of that period. He finally, after that relationship, wanted to have a fresh new start with dating someone and making it a relationship. At the beginning, he love bombed me, told me he'd tell his ex, etc., about how amazing I was, and he made me feel like he was in it for the long haul. Now, I never dated an avoidant. I was unaware of little comments like I am now, where he would say things like, when the hand holding and kissing stops, so does the relationship. I thought it odd, but didn't really think on it. He told me he didn't like to do confrontation. I would always go to his house, never mine, as he had a noise aversion. He didn't do kids either, even though my sons are fully grown. I noticed he'd like to drink at weekends a bottle of wine and had insomnia, and we'd nap in afternoons. I'd go home to do stuff at mine. He gets pissed off if I was away. He'd bang on about gaslighting and how I did it, but I didn't. I had a 20-year marriage previously with a narcissist, and I'd come into this relationship open and honest as I'd wanted this one to work. Now, during this time, we had a little fight, and he went silent on me for a week. I messaged, and he'd ignore it. Just as I had enough, he said, let's try again, and we did. Later on, his ex got out of lockdown into a sheltered accommodation, and it was always a complaint about how he'd run to help her if she ever needed a bit of support, but she never even bothered to support him, and I felt really put off by this behavior. He wouldn't tell her about us, and I couldn't understand a link about not having any kids, and he also said that she drank because of the loss of her parents, but I realize now it was because he repeatedly cheated on her and would boomerang in and out of her life, and at the end, she ended up getting Alzheimer's because of the booze. So it's a shame how this all developed. And it was probably the guilt of what kept coming, of what ultimately caused him to keep returning to help her. He had enough of caring for her, as I'd never met anyone like him, and he still has no empathy. in regards to the whole situation. Now, back on our first date, all he would do is talk about his job and that his bosses hated him and they were waiting for redundancy. So for the last 2 years, it was the main source of topic for our conversations. When he cheated or left his ex, his the girls he went with were he would call psychotic in the end. Now, this was a huge red flag. Alongside this, he brought me loads of things 2 years in when we went on holidays and had a beautiful time. I noticed he'd started to nitpick and it was getting meaner, but I wouldn't rise to it. When we came back, my dog, which he loved to bits, nearly died, and I turned to my sons to help him whilst this was happening. And then one day he woke up and was having a go at me, and then he informed me we weren't getting on in our relationship and he needed time to himself. He'd also lost his mum at 18. His dad fell apart and he never dealt with it. And his brother, out of the blue, had some pictures of his mum he'd never seen. And I think that triggered a lot of his attitudes where he would say things like, "You could die tomorrow. I'm spending my redundancy. I'll do what I like." We'd always talk about moving and getting together to find a place. But I held off selling my home as I always felt something wasn't quite right. Like it was a shallow relationship that lacked significant depth. The sex had started to fade over time, and I'd even asked him outright if he was a player. Now, I honestly thought he'd matured, but I realize now that obviously, I was pretty wrong about this. I went down the following weekend and he said he was okay and distant. Despite the week, I rang him outright and asked him, "Hey, what's going on between us?" And he had said the spark was gone and he was broken. He was vague and indifferent. So I said for my mental health, I'd come and get my stuff and try and work on things for myself. He said, "Come on the weekend." And I waited for him to go to work and went and got my stuff. And that was it. I heard from him 3 weeks later saying, "Nice pic on the group chat. And I got some of your stuff that you should still take, so don't forget it." I was polite and said, "Please chuck that in a bag and lob it in my porch." And then subsequently, he asked me about my dog, like he gives a fuck. 5 weeks or more late, he's still not dropped off my stuff, despite telling me that was his intention. And I plan not to go anywhere near him. I left quietly with dignity, and I've not said anything to his friends. It's been absolutely devastating out of the blue, and it hurt me more than I care to admit. I knew something wasn't right at first, as he was lovely, especially during holidays, but in the end, it devolved into nitpicking, control, and gaslighting. He put up some pics in a group through WhatsApp chat where I have friends aimed at me, and I'm not giving him any attention. Now, after coming here to your wonderful website, I'm finally moving on. Yours, thankfully, Serena. Serena, thank you very much for sharing this with me. Jesus Christ, what a what a pretty intense and awful experience you've gone through, and I'm so sorry that you've gone through this. Okay, let's get straight into this. This is giving me fearful avoidant vibes, plus, meaning I think there's a lot more than just an insecure attachment at play here. Let's start with the beginning. Just because someone is of a particular age, like in their late 50s, 60s, 70s, if they haven't worked on their childhood stuff, guess what? Time ain't gonna fix that. And it seems to me like he's gone the way of just sticking in his coping mechanisms and he's still acting like a player, even, at this particular age, which is disgusting behavior. I also can see here too something that was really, really fascinating, which is the relationship he had with his ex and how she'd become an alcoholic. And apparently he cared for her but couldn't cope when she was in lockdown. Okay, so speculation time. Based on what I know of avoidant attachers, particularly fearful avoidant attachers, is sometimes in those relationships, as I mentioned before, they can feel guilty for, partners who are going through a bad time and may want to obviously support them. And in books like Women Who Love Too Much by Robin Norwood, she talks about how particularly women with an anxious attachment style who are trying to facilitate these codependent relationships with the avoidant may end up becoming addicts. And this is supported by like literature like Facing Love Addiction by Pia Mellody, where they can develop really bad habits to suppress the anxiety they're feeling in the relationship. And rather than speaking up and being like, "This is terrible," they can often go into a heap and they may have this belief of, well, if I get really, unwell, maybe this person will finally notice and appreciate and support me. And it seems like that didn't happen. If anything, it seems like as the health issues escalated, he backed away. Now, I appreciate we don't know what caused this person to become an alcoholic, but it's not unreasonable to at least assume, speculate that, you know, this is a man where, based on the evidence, he's caused a lot of anxiety for the intimate partners he's been with. And it seems to me that, being in a relationship like this might have also induced a lot of anxiety for his ex. And who knows how she was dealing with that. Alcohol is one hell of a drug for anxiety management, and I do not recommend it for anyone. But it does happen a lot, unfortunately. And people who are anxiously attached who are, they lean more into that fawning response of not speaking up for their feelings, are at particular risk of being in this particular category where let's just say their coping mechanisms for their anxiety can get the better of them. Now, going into another part of this, I think what's really interesting to me is how it seems like he had all these little micro rules, you know, needing to go to his house to sleep together. Apparently has a noise aversion. Doesn't do kids, even though your sons are full-grown adults from the sound of it. And also his need to be drinking lots of wine throughout the day. To me, that sounds like it's one of his coping mechanisms. And also, I find it interesting how he was banging on about you gaslighting when you weren't even gaslighting at all. Suggests to me that there were probably moments where he was testing the relationship and poking and prodding to see how you'd react. To me, it seems like he's probably used to a lot of gaslighting and English, problematic behavior in his past. But I feel like with that point, my suspicion is that he was probably doing a bit of testing of you in that particular way. And that's not something we would see normally with a dismissive avoidant. Like to me, this sounds like this guy has definitely got a bit of betrayal wounding sort of stuff going on. But again, that's my speculation on this too. And it doesn't feel right to me that he's doing that to you. And frankly, he should be going to a therapist and also bringing this up about how he feels like you're gaslighting him rather than being like, you're gaslighting me. So yeah, not great. Now let's talk about one of the biggest elephants in the room, the relationship between him and his ex that was ongoing throughout this entire time. I find it baffling that anyone in a relationship would actually, still have such a strong relationship to their ex where they're still doing caregiving duties for them while trying to have a new relationship with someone new. I think that for an avoidant attacher, it makes a great deal of sense, particularly a fearful avoidant, because I think on one hand, they want to have their cake and eat it too. They also don't want to feel guilty at letting their former partner down. They don't want to lose the connection to that person because it might still feel good to have it around, even if they're not committing to a single relationship. But you can see, even in this dynamic, right? As you're getting closer to him, he brings the ex back in as a way to get in between you and them. So it's almost like he's playing the field by having these people in the way. So that way he manages his own fear of intimacy. And I go back to what I was saying too before, which is I wouldn't be surprised if she was, an alcoholic as a consequence of this experience. And I am so sorry she got Alzheimer's because that's terrible. Now, another bit of speculation is that, I wouldn't be surprised if both your ex, Serena, and his ex, who developed alcoholism, may have come from a history of addiction because it seems to me like both of them probably are no strangers to looking for coping mechanisms to manage uncomfortable emotions. So maybe there was a bit of familiarity there that was going on for both of them as well too, but still not great for either of them. And then to me, I think what's interesting to me also is the fact that it seems like there were also a lot of other big red flags like cheating. He was talking about how all of his girlfriends would go psychotic at the end. And this is where I sort of wonder, okay, what made them go crazy at the end? Was it his antics and behavior like he was doing to you? Did he in fact date women who, you know, were unfortunately at times very dysregulated in their behavior? But to me, I just sort of worry about this because I think, oh, that's not a good sound. And it seems like he's probably, I wouldn't say like everyone is like this, but, to me, that's a pretty dodgy sign. And the fact that he also repeatedly, cheat on his ex and boomerang in and out of her life, God, that's a terrible experience to go through. I think the way you navigated this by being like, I'm not going to deal with this. Please leave my stuff on my porch. and just setting those boundaries is definitely the right move to have made. And I think you've done very well for yourself, especially considering the fact that, Serena, you mentioned you've dated a narcissist. So I can imagine this was probably a very, at first it would have seemed like it was going well, only for things to go pear-shaped in the end. So I'm really sorry that you had this. But it seems to me that this is an experience that went from honeymoon to disaster quite quickly. You mentioned how the sex, had that twinkle of when he was a great lover in his prime. And then he's talking to you about how the spark was gone and he was broken. To me, that again speaks to that avoidant wound of feeling like they're defective and there's something wrong with them. Now, at the beginning of this particular recording, I said this feels like fearful avoidant attachment plus. I wouldn't be surprised at the very least. Like I said, there's probably addiction stuff going on, but I almost wonder if there's some personality stuff going on here too, because there is a lot of extreme stuff here. And the fact that he's also continued to act in this way, is so bad. Like, I mean, I think there is a bit of an extreme, like when we look at this from, the big picture, it just seems like there's a lot of extreme stuff going on. So I just want to say maybe there's some personality flavors that are in the mix of this experience too that you went through. I can't say for certain what though, but definitely some stuff here that's not just avoidant attachment sort of stuff. I will say that it is interesting how, he obviously wasn't getting on very well at work. And he also was having difficulties with obviously a lot of his exes. So it makes me wonder, I wonder again, was there a personality issue here that was contributing to this as well, too? So not that great. But yeah, I think going back to what I said earlier, I think you handled this extremely well given the circumstances, but I'm sorry that you had to leave quietly with dignity because it seems like even if you did the right thing for yourself, it's nothing short of painful. And I'm sorry that you had that. Again, the fact that he was nitpicking, that is a very FA sort of thing to do. Controlling, yeah, that can be as well. Gaslighting, there too. But I think there's something about the way you've written this that just makes me feel like this still feels like there's some other elements and extremity to this that's not typical of someone who's just a fearful avoidant. So that's what I'm putting it out there and saying, I think there is some other stuff that's going on here too. But the fear of intimacy piece, oh yeah, like that's absolutely there. Anyways, Serena, thank you for this letter. I really appreciate you sending this. And again, I'm so sorry that you had this experience. I want to just take a step back and say, obviously, to anyone who found value in this letter, it'd be great if you can review the episode, as that really helps to show that we're obviously, doing the right thing for people and validating your experience. And if you want to submit your own letter, just as a reminder, the submission is not open until about mid-October. So we'll be taking letters then. And I'm limiting it down to 12 submissions because I want to make sure that I'm able to give quality time to each of them. And I'm going to raise the rates for those because previously I got swamped with letters and I just want to make sure that I can get round to each of them and give them quality time. But apart from that, I hope that this reading was of benefit to those of you who listened and it was relatable. But yeah, I just want to say again, similar to yesterday's letter, I feel like there's more to this than just simple attachment style craziness. I think there's obviously a bit more stuff here, but it's hard to discern with great accuracy based on my experience and just reading this letter exclusively without having this dude present for therapy. But it is, I would say for sure, this man definitely has a lot of trauma given his past. And it seems like he's got some addiction issues and he certainly has intimacy issues with women for sure, based on what you shared. So thank you very much, Serena, again. And I look forward to reading out the next letter.